Hi, and thank you for hosting me today. Excited to be working with People First again. For those of you I didn't get the opportunity to meet the first go around, my name is Stephen Perry. I'm the Director of Training and Development here at First Choice Services. I've also been a licensed social worker for about the last 12 years, and with my role here at First Choice Services, what I do is I design and I teach certain clinical skills to our helpline staff and crisis counselors. So whether someone's calling because they're lonely, they need someone to talk to, or maybe they're dealing with a suicidal crisis, a serious issue. Maybe they're trying to get into a recovery program. That counselor, that helpline specialist, they're going to have the fundamental competencies necessary to follow that call nearly wherever it goes. You know, life is challenging enough, even without a global pandemic and perpetual war. I mean, there's almost always, if you turn on the news, there's always bad news, something to be outraged about every day. It makes you think, how low can the bar go? I know for me, it feels like over the last couple of years, maybe I went out for some beers with friends in 2020, and I'm still struggling with that hangover in 2022. And the source of our stress, whether we're aware it's impacting us or not, it can come from a lot of different sources. But just so we're all on the same page, let's quickly define what stress is. Stress is defined as a particular relationship between the person and their environment that is appraised by that person as taxing or exceeding their resources and endangering their well-being. Now, with that being said, we are going to learn a little bit about certain different types of stress, and also good stress, because not all stress is going to be bad, and we'll get to that later on in this presentation. But for right now, I do want us to focus on the most familiar version of stress we think about. I mean, just looking back, I know for me at least, the last couple of years, they've just kind of blurred together, like one of those low-definition fatback TVs from the 80s and 90s. You know, we're still dealing with COVID. We know over the last couple of years there's been worldwide illness, death, hospitals, EMS workers, frontline workers. They've all been at or near their breaking point. And the cases are ramping back up too as we start to get closer into cold and flu season. I believe it was just a couple weeks ago, Governor Jim Justice and Baby Dog reminded us that we're not out of the woods yet with COVID. Now we're dealing with the latest epidemic, monkeypox, although I think I read somewhere that maybe those cases are starting to level off. Thankfully, I haven't had to experience that one yet, but it sounds incredibly painful and sort of unsightly. We've seen gas prices break $5 a gallon. I know folks that have trucks and SUVs where it takes them over $100 to fill up. Look, just back in February, this long simmering beef between Russia and Ukraine had spilled out into all-out war. Now, here we are, 7 months later? We're maybe not seeing it in the headlines as much, but we do know that the war over there is affecting supply chain and supply chain issues and prices over here. And maybe we're a little nervous still yet about when and how other countries might get involved and what that would do for global relations. And certainly here on the home front, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, we know our two major political parties have never been farther apart ideologically. And the truth of the matter is that while they bicker there in D.C. with one another, it's us all across the country that pay the price for their inefficiency. And I guess maybe in just a few more months, we're going to be back to the annual bread and milk purge whenever we see trace or hear rumor of snow. So get ready for milk and bread sandwiches again. But truly, the stress has been real, and at times really reaching this sort of flashpoint that for a lot of us, I think maybe it just feels overwhelming. Big, crushing, oppressive. And First Choice Services, I like to think that we appreciate the effect that this has on folks. And that's why we do have a few different helplines to offer support for stress. You look at the first one on your screen here, the number 4, and that's our Help for West Virginia program, because Stress can sometimes lead to unhealthy coping habits like substance abuse or substance misuse. And our Help for West Virginia line, it's a central access point for linkage to our state's drug treatment and behavioral health centers. Also, a little less known, Help for West Virginia, it's also a peer warm line, meaning you don't have to be seeking help for addiction. Look, if you just need someone to talk to and sort of get outside of your own head for a little while, our Help for West Virginia staff, they're trained to listen, they're trained to offer support, and you can reach out to them or share the digits with someone you know and care about that you see on the screen here, 844-435-7498. You can also text that number, and you can chat with us as well through our website, which you can access through firstchoiceservices.org. The next icon you see here, this is Bernice. You might have seen her on different billboards across the interstate, 79, 64, 77, and maybe even in some different streets where you live. But following declaration of COVID as a national pandemic a couple years ago, we created a new line, and it's our state's, West Virginia's first and only emotional strength line. We call it Help 304. Help 304. This is a program where anyone can call any time of day, any day of the week, even on holidays, and no red tape, no bureaucracy, no wait times. You can talk with a trained crisis counselor who's going to listen attentively. They're going to offer tips on managing your stress and maybe how to, help turn down, if I could learn how to speak the Queen's English, help turn down the worry volume a few notches. We offer different options to access this service too. Phone and text at the numbers that you see here, 877-435-7304. You can also text that number, or someone can even chat as well at help304.com. And more recently, maybe you've caught this one in the news or on the interwebs somewhere, there is National 988. This is the new easy-to-remember 3-digit phone number for the National Suicide Prevention and Crisis Lifeline. Now, if you or someone you know is experiencing a suicidal crisis, all you need to do now is simply dial or text 988. Or you can chat with a trained crisis counselor at 988lifeline.org. They've actually even made it even more simple. If you just go to Google and type in 988, you can chat with a crisis counselor that way as well. And here's the thing about 988. This is great. You don't have to be suicidal to call. Like our other programs, 988, it's available to anyone who's maybe just feeling stressed, anxious, or sort of at the end of their wick, and they just need someone to talk to. Now, there are more obvious signs of stress, the ones I'm sure we're all pretty well acquainted with, things like agitation, irritability, depression, feeling isolated. Maybe you're feeling run ragged, but there's also some more advanced presentations for stress that we may associate with being maybe a health problem. So we might think of things like being short of breath, panic attacks, chest pains, so on. And make no mistake, those are health problems, but it's also important to consider the source of that issue. Could the source be connected to stress? And if so, are we in a position to where we can control for that? And there are even more ways we can kind of take personal inventory of what our stress symptoms are. Now, there's certainly the physical symptoms that kind of come to mind, things like low energy. Maybe you're not getting enough sleep, so you're dealing with insomnia. And by the way, sleep, it's so important. We're going to spend some time talking about that a little later on, but it really does. It plays such a vital role in our ability to handle stress. If you're not getting enough sleep, maybe you're going to be more prone to getting different types of headaches, or maybe even tension headaches. When you've got so much muscle tension from hypervigilance, you might even start to experience things like muscle pain or intestinal issues. And then there's also cognitive symptoms as well. Cognitive symptoms of stress. This could include things like forgetfulness. Maybe you're just feeling, foggy more often, unable to recall things as quickly or without prompting. You might be showing poor judgment, confusion, inability to solve problems. You might be experiencing unhealthy negative self-talk. We call this self-bias, negative self-bias, where you're starting to kind of just berate yourself or maybe only see the negative sides of things. And then there's behavioral presentations too. And this is going to sort of reflect itself through changes in things like appetite. Maybe we're barely eating or maybe eating too much. Are you putting off cleaning the house or folding the laundry? And the thing about it is this kind of stress, while it seems benign enough, if we leave it unchecked, it can undoubtedly lead to poor and unhealthy coping habits like increased substance use, overeating, risky behavior, and so on. Sometimes we're not even aware that stress is affecting us because we become so used to dealing with it that feeling stress, it's kind of just become a way of life for a lot of us. And over time, that can leave some pretty damaging health issues. So leading to maybe even the experience of physical pain, physical symptoms. Seriously, excessive stress built over time, it can result in physical pain through, as we established earlier, muscle tension, headaches, migraines. Stress can also result in issues with our respiratory system, triggering those beta receptors that control heart rate, respiration, causing in some cases maybe hyperventilation, exacerbation of existing conditions like COPD, asthma, emphysema, bronchitis. And same with those beta receptors. Once they're activated, you're pumping more blood, which means your heart muscle is having to work overtime to keep up, thereby increasing your heart rate. So now we're talking increased blood pressure, maybe hypertension, maybe even heart attack or stroke if there's underlying conditions there. Even the endocrine system, like the overproduction of cortisol, that can lead to osteoporosis, bone loss, muscle weakness, weight gain in the face, even mood swings. We might start to experience gastrointestinal issues like ulcers, esophageal problems like increased heartburn, acid reflux, and the regulation of our stress response system. So now we're talking about our nervous system being sort of set on high alert at all times. So if we put too much stress on that nervous system, that can eventually lead to compromised blood circulation and maybe even compromised immunity. And of course, the reproductive system, it's also affected by stress. So sexual desire, or in some cases, the lack of interest in sex, maybe sexual dysfunction, even damage to a woman's ability to conceive. Stress, when we view it through this lens, we start to see that it is this slow killer to all of the body's major symptoms. And though not quite as commonly occurring, hair loss or even premature graying can occur. And this can be due to chronic stress, which causes people to lose the pigment in their hair. And we see a lot of this in elected officials. So think about someone like Bill Clinton, how he looked before and after he left office. Bush, Obama, they all look at how they came into office, thick heads of hair, salt and pepper, brown and black. Look at how much grayer their hair was by the end of their respective terms. And don't forget this too, stress can also lead to straight up hair loss. This is actually a picture of me here on the left and a picture of me on the right. This is me in my 20s. This is me in my 40s now. I once used to have a full, thick head of hair. We see right here, some might have even called me at one point follically fertile, to now the sort of barren, kind of scorched earth look that I'm going with nowadays. Just an aerodynamic flesh helmet for my brain. Stress can also affect how people experience pain. There was actually a study done with children. They have children with recurring abdominal pain. And the study showed that stress reduced their tolerance for that kind of pain. And in people with chronic pain, pain levels actually spike during periods of stress. Now, scientists, they think this heightened pain response might occur because stress can make the hormones that help people cope with pain, those endorphins, it can help make them less effective. Other symptoms could include a heightened sense of smell, the feeling of a lump in your throat, like as if you can't swallow completely, where what that really is the muscles in the lower part of the throat, they're constricting because of stress, which can create the sensation like being unable to swallow. And as I pointed out earlier, bowel and bladder issues as well. But it is important to make some distinctions. As you can see here, stress is kind of like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Not all stress is going to be the same. Now, all of us are going to deal with acute stress throughout our lives. This is the kind of stress we encounter more often than others. Maybe we're getting stuck in traffic. Maybe the alarm didn't go off in the morning. You're behind on a deadline. You're probably going to feel with acute stress. You're probably going to feel that racing heartbeat. You might even experience some chest pain, some sweatiness, possibly a headache. But despite acute stress being fairly routine, if we're not dealing with acute stress in a healthy way, our minds can really start to obsess on it. You might find yourself worrying more about things in the past or in the future that either you can't change or they're just so far ahead that it's causing you to disengage from what's important now, the present, the here and now, the stuff that we really need to be investing ourselves into. This, again, if we leave it unchecked, it can lead to added stress on your career, personal, professional relationships, worsening health problems. Another kind of stress we want to think about too is episodic stress. Episodic stress, a little different than acute stress. Episodic stress, it tends to occur more in people who kind of operate within and live their lives in stress. So you're going to start to recognize this when maybe you have trouble setting personal boundaries. Maybe you're always saying yes, taking on too many commitments. And I get it, I do. It is. It's hard to say no to people who are important to us, or saying no to activities that we want to participate in. But there's only 24 hours in a day. And again, that need for sleep, we can't continue to borrow from sleep to compensate for the things we want to do during the day. That need cannot be overstated. You really need to have some healthy coping habits to turn to when you're feeling this kind of stress. So this might include exercise, even just walking a little. Maybe you need to connect with a therapist, because over the long haul, even though it's kind of benign, maybe episodic stress can lead to unhealthy coping habits like binge drinking, overindulgence, codependency in our relationships, and even depression. Lastly, I do want to talk about chronic stress. Chronic stress, we can probably describe this more on the lines of that grinding sort of stress that we typically see. It's going to come from things like living in poverty, adverse or traumatic experiences in childhood, racism, bigotry, those sort of unrelenting experiences that just never go away. And this can lead to, over time, diminished resiliency, where maybe even minor challenges are going to be enough to set off that stress response system. This condition, it starts to evolve into a syndrome called toxic stress syndrome. Toxic stress syndrome, we tend to see this in adults who've experienced a lot of trauma in their youth. Now, for more on that, we're going to check out a brief video.
Cramming for a test? Trying to get more done than you have time to do? Stress is a feeling we all experience when we are challenged or overwhelmed. But more than just an emotion, stress is a hardwired physical response that travels throughout your entire body. In the short term, stress can be advantageous, but when activated too often or too long, your primitive fight or flight stress response not only changes your brain, but also damages many of the other organs and cells throughout your body. Your adrenal gland releases the stress hormones cortisol, epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, and norepinephrine. As these hormones travel through your bloodstream, they easily reach your blood vessels and heart. Adrenaline causes your heart to beat faster and raises your blood pressure, over time causing hypertension. Cortisol can also cause the endothelium, or inner lining of blood vessels, to not function normally. Scientists now know that this is an early step in triggering the process of atherosclerosis, or cholesterol plaque buildup in your arteries. Together, these changes increase your chances of a heart attack or stroke. When your brain senses stress, it activates your autonomic nervous system. Through this network of nerve connections, your big brain communicates stress to your enteric or intestinal nervous system. Besides causing butterflies in your stomach, this brain-gut connection can disturb the natural rhythmic contractions that move food through your gut, leading to irritable bowel syndrome, and can increase your gut's sensitivity to acid, making you more likely to feel heartburn. Via the gut's nervous system, stress can also change the composition and function of your gut bacteria, which may affect your digestive and overall health. Speaking of digestion, does chronic stress affect your waistline? Well, yes. Cortisol can increase your appetite. It tells your body to replenish your energy stores with energy-dense foods and carbs, causing you to crave comfort foods. High levels of cortisol can also cause you to put on those extra calories as visceral or deep belly fat. This type of fat doesn't just make it harder to button your pants. It is an organ that actively releases hormones and immune system chemicals called cytokines that can increase your risk of developing chronic diseases such as heart disease and insulin resistance. Meanwhile, stress hormones affect immune cells in a variety of ways. Initially, they help prepare to fight invaders and heal after injury, but chronic stress can dampen the function of some immune cells, make you more susceptible to infections, and slow the rate you heal. Want to live a long life? You may have to curb your chronic stress. That's because it has even been associated with shortened telomeres, the shoelace tip ends of chromosomes that measure a cell's age. Telomeres cap chromosomes to allow DNA to get copied every time a cell divides without damaging the cell's genetic code. And they shorten with each cell division. When telomeres become too short, a cell can no longer divide, and it dies. As if all that weren't enough, chronic stress has even more ways it can sabotage your health, including acne, hair loss, sexual dysfunction, headaches, muscle tension, difficulty concentrating, fatigue, and irritability. So, what does all this mean for you? Your life will always be filled with stressful situations, but what matters to your brain and entire body is how you respond to that stress. If you can view those situations as challenges you can control and master, rather than as threats that are insurmountable, you will perform better in the short run and stay healthy in the long run.
So as the video mentioned, stress is just a part of life. If we're alive, if we're breathing on this planet, then undoubtedly there's going to be challenges that we have to confront that might cause distress along the way. We experience stress even on small levels. We experience it most days, and while I think most of us are probably mostly aware of what stresses us out, there really is power in being able to pin down precisely what those stress triggers are and in identifying exactly how those stressors affect us. And when we have that kind of knowledge, we might be better equipped then to maybe not entirely avoid stress in challenging situations, but to at least minimize the impact by better recognizing when stress is affecting us, and in some cases, maybe even causing impairment and dysfunction in other areas of our life. So just for a couple seconds here, I want you to think, maybe reflect on what your stress triggers are. And I also want you to consider this in the broader context. when you are triggered, when you are feeling stressed, is the way that you cope with that stress, in fact, creating more stress in your life? In other words, are our coping skills making situations worse for us? Now, as I mentioned earlier, and we're going to talk on this just briefly here, but not all stress is bad. In fact, there are some types of stress that can be really pretty good for us. The good stress, it's a little different from distress, and this is called eustress. Eustress, Eustress, eustress. And this can be a beneficial kind of stress. Eustress, it can help improve our emotional health. It can improve better psychological health through enhanced self-efficacy, autonomy, resilience, and of course it has benefits for our physical health as well. Like, for instance, maybe the kind of feeling you have during a challenging workout. You might also feel eustress when you've maybe nailed a project at work, or maybe you're traveling someplace new and exciting for the first time. So now that we have talked about the different kinds of stress and how it affects us and why it's important that we're monitoring these stress levels, we're going to talk about now, we're going to pivot and we're going to kind of explore how to manage our stress. And this could be through, hopefully, healthy coping habits, but sometimes we're prone to unhealthy coping habits, no doubt. Developing unhealthy coping habits like drinking, drug use, over or undereating, gambling, taking unnecessary risks, this can add to our stress load. But if we can learn a few adaptive coping skills, these can go a long way in developing an improved sense of self-resiliency, an improved sense of self, healthier thinking, kind of like you see in your handout there. And there may be, or rather there are, a few coping mechanisms that we can turn to in order to help soothe ourselves and decompress when we feel that stress gauge may be getting into the red zone. But overall, what we're looking to do with healthy coping is to better manage our stress, and we also want to be engaging in what we call ongoing self-care. That's right. We, as the guardians of our own mental health and well-being, we're also entrusted with the responsibility of being good stewards to ourselves, providing self-care to ourselves when these added stressors start to accumulate. You know, maybe we do have a counselor or a therapist we see once a week, and there's absolutely a benefit to that, and it cannot and should not be understated. But day to day, you, me, ourselves, we're responsible for looking out for number one and engaging in healthy, pro-self sort of activities that bring us peace, that bring us joy, that bring us calm and satisfaction. And yeah, meditation, it can be a part of your self-care routine, but that doesn't always mean sitting under a tree in lotus position. I mean, if meditation is your thing, that's great. But it can also refer to the ability to take care of activities of daily living, or ADLs, like feeding yourself, maybe taking a shower, brushing your teeth, wearing clean clothes, attending to medical concerns, physical self-care, like taking naps, sleep, exercise. That's also an ADL. Self-care can also refer to activities that an individual engages in to relax or attain emotional well-being. So like meditation, journaling, or even visiting a counselor. Heck, even something as simple as folding clothes, that can sort of have meditative type benefits, because an extended failure to care for ourselves, as we've established, can maybe even result in our increased likelihood of getting sick, and as we've already established, in some cases much worse. One of the most effective means of self-care might be getting in the form of just getting a little emotional support from someone you trust. You know, there are really therapeutic benefits to just talking to someone about what's getting to you or what's stressing you out. But if you're not really stoked about sharing your dirty laundry with friends or family, then maybe connecting with a therapist would be a better route. But sometimes I know that can be cost prohibitive. Sometimes we have to wait too long. And if that's maybe not an option right now, there's always one of our helplines. Look, all of our mental health lines, Help 304-988, Help for West Virginia, these all offer emotional support services, and these are totally free. We're just a phone call, chat, or text away. So whether you or someone needs to just get some stuff off your chest, you can call Help 304-877-435-7304. Whether you or someone needs to maybe get into a treatment program, or you're considering suicide, or you're in the midst of a suicidal crisis, or you're worried about someone who's contemplating suicide, text, call, chat 988. This is an easy to remember number, and we're going to help provide an intervention with that person to help keep them safe from whatever lethal means that they might use to end their life. Remember, just text or call 988, and especially for younger people, sometimes maybe there's a little bit of insecurity or nervousness about phone-to-phone contact, so they can also chat as well at 988.org, or just Google search 988 and you can talk with a crisis counselor over that way. And then, of course, sometimes we find ourselves in the midst of maybe relapse, or using or drinking more of a particular substance than what we normally would. And if life finds us needing to get into a treatment program for drugs or alcohol, Help for West Virginia can help your friends, your family, your loved ones, or you for that matter, with understanding what all resources are out there. And as I mentioned earlier, again, all these lines, they're available morning, noon, or night, even holidays. Even if it's not about suicide or recovery resources, all of our helpline specialists and counselors, they're trained to provide peer support, to listen without judgment, to listen with an attentive ear, to provide compassion, and in some cases, maybe even guidance when times get real hard. Speaking of other self-care, some self-care strategies, sometimes solving problems. Just the act of identifying the issue that's causing your stress, maybe putting together some resources or some different options to resolve it. This can lead to a feeling of empowerment, increased sense of self-reliance, like at that point that you can look inward to fix your own problems. Of course, they say, as the cliche goes, laughter is the best medicine, because we know that only the truth is funny, and making light of a stressful situation can oftentimes help keep things in perspective. And here's a big one. We're going to spend some time talking about this one. I told you it was coming. Exercise and physical activity, redirecting all that nervous energy and burning it off through a fun, physically strenuous exercise. Now, I know some of us are too busy to fit exercise in. Hell, I have the same battle every day after work. Before, during, and after work, there always seems to be something more pressing that needs our attention. Maybe it's picking the kids up from daycare, preparing dinner, putting extra hours in at the office, taking care of a sick parent, helping with homework, whatever the case may be. Sometimes we're just too tired that by the time we finish everything we have to do during the day, the only thing that we have time and energy to do is to crash into the bed and get enough rest to recharge before doing it all over again. And here's the thing to keep in mind is that these things, these life obligations, these responsibilities that we have, they're never going to stop. There's always going to be reasons that we can come up with as to why it's too hard to squeeze in time to work up a little sweat. But on the flip side of that, there are just as many reasons that we need to, why physical exercise is something we really ought to find time to build into our routines. Because the benefits are not just restricted to changes in our physical appearance, but they're total in scope. Studies show that even as little as 15 minutes, just 15 minutes of running or walking a day, that can be as effective as an antidepressant medication. This means you don't need to be ready to run a marathon or even a 5K for that matter, but just making time to run or walk 15 or 30 minutes a day, that can have a major impact. Studies show that 20 minutes of walking a day, it actually burns off 5 pounds of fat a year. You want to up the risk, you want to up the ante rather, try 45 minutes a day. You're cutting your chances of catching a cold, cutting them in half. How about this? Each minute you walk, it can extend your life by as much as 2 minutes. And even just walking 20 to 25 minutes a week can extend your life by several years. Other studies even find that regular exercise, it can help reinforce sobriety and prevent relapse. But what about anxiety and stress? I mean, that is what we're here to talk about. Well, the truth in this regard is that all these things can kind of be interconnected. And exercise, it's this sort of natural and effective treatment for anxiety. What it does is it relieves tension, it relieves stress, it boosts physical and mental energy, enhances the sense of well-being through the release of endorphins. There's also the added benefit of improved sense of presence and awareness. So when we exercise, we don't need to just, try to fly through these movements, but also try to sort of lose ourselves in the moment. So try to pay attention to the sensation of your feet hitting the ground, the experience of air entering and leaving your lungs, or the rhythm of your breathing, the feeling of the wind on your skin. By being more mindful during these exercise routines, it really helps us focus on our body and what it feels like as we exercise. And you'll not only improve your physical condition faster when you're able to practice that kind of mindfulness, but you may also be able to interrupt the flow of constant worries that run through your head. Also with exercise, we're reducing our risk of Alzheimer's, slowing the decline of cognitive functioning, improving memory and attention span by, in some cases, as much as 20%. And this is before we even consider the physical benefits of exercise, like reducing high blood pressure, reducing heart disease, osteoporosis, breast cancer, colon cancer, high cholesterol, diabetes. As you might suspect, healthy eating is also a part of managing our stress and improving our self-care regimen. Unfortunately, like an expensive car, our brains, they can be damaged if we ingest anything other than premium fuel. So if we're getting our energy from low-grade fuels, like what we would get from processed and refined foods, if we let those get to the brain doesn't have a lot of ability to get rid of those. So diets high in refined sugars, those are actually going to be harmful to our brain. And in addition to worsening our body's regulation of insulin, these refined sugar foods, high in preservatives and starches and carbs, these also promote inflammation and oxidative stress. Lots of studies have found a link between a diet high in refined sugars and impaired brain function. There's a connection between those two, and even a worsening of mood disorder symptoms like depression. And that's because serotonin, the same neurochemical that helps regulate sleep and appetite, it helps to mediate your moods and inhibit pain. Well, about 95% of your serotonin, it's produced in your gastrointestinal tract. And your gastrointestinal tract, it's lined with 100 million nerve cells or neurons. So it makes sense then that the inner workings of your digestive system don't just help you digest food, but they also guide your emotions. What's more, the function of these neurons and the production of neurotransmitters like serotonin, they're highly influenced by billions of good bacteria that make up your intestinal microbiome. These bacteria, they're crucial for your health. They protect the lining of your intestines. They ensure that they provide a strong barrier against toxins and bad bacteria. They limit inflammation. They improve how well you absorb nutrients from your food. And they activate neural pathways that travel directly between the gut and the brain. Studies have compared traditional diets, like the one we see on the screen here, the Mediterranean diet and traditional Japanese diets, to what is our typical Western diet, which is heavy in carbs, fats, refined sugars. And these studies have shown that the risk of depression is 25 to 35% lower in those who eat a traditional natural diet. Scientists also account for this difference because these traditional diets, they tend to be higher in vegetables and fruits like we see on the screen here, as well as unprocessed, natural or whole grains, fish and seafood, and they usually only contain very small amounts of red meats, chicken, pork, dairy, and so on. They're also void of processed and refined foods and sugars. In addition, many of these unprocessed foods, they also come as fermented. So then they start to act as natural probiotics to help keep us regular. Now, just important to healthier eating is also getting healthier sleep. According to the Mayo Clinic, the younger you are, the more sleep you need. But most adults, we still need about 7 to 9 hours of sleep a day. And it's not just the quantity, it's actually the sleep quality that you're getting that really matters. See, if you're sleeping, if your sleep is frequently interrupted, you're not getting quality sleep. The quality of your sleep is just as important as the quantity. Some people, they can claim to feel rested on just a few hours of sleep a night, but their performance is probably going to be affected the next day. Research shows that people who don't get enough sleep over several nights, they usually don't perform as well on complex mental tasks as people do who get closer to maybe 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. To put performance in perspective, take Albert Einstein, for instance. We see him on the screen here. Einstein, he used to get like 10 hours of sleep a night, even used to fit in daytime naps. Bill Clinton, on the other hand, he used only to get like 5 to 6 hours of sleep a night when he was president. He said in an interview in 2008, he said that most of the mistakes he made when he was too tired because he was trying too hard and worked too hard. He says, quote, "You make better decisions when you're not tired." That in mind, any guesses as to how much sleep the average adult gets nowadays? Give you a few seconds. It's actually 5 hours. 5 hours. That's actually 2 hours less than what we used to get just back in the 60s. Now, like a lot of folks, for a long time, I bought into this idea that I could borrow from sleep to get more done during the day, and that sleep, it was really only meant for babies and old folks. And I also thought, maybe if I was sleeping, I was missing out on something, whether it was hanging out with friends, cramming for exam, or as I got older, working extra hours to, get my career to where I wanted it to be. Sleep really had become, oftentimes for me, the last priority, and to an extent, that's an outlook that carries a lot of favor these days, and it's a dangerous one too, especially in the professional world. A lot of folks wear these sort of lack of sleep. They wear their lack of sleep like it's some kind of badge of honor. It's true, seriously. In the last few years, we've seen countless articles about what they call as the sleepless elite, these entrepreneurs and CEOs, successful politicians who claim that they function on just like 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night. Take, for instance, the chairman and CEO of Pepsi. He says he only sleeps for like 4 hours each night, while fashion designer Tom Ford only catches 3 hours of sleep. But there is, like most things in life, there's a trade-off when we deprive our body and our brain of sleep. And they're not minuscule. What we're doing here is we're talking memory issues. During sleep, our brains, they make those connections and store new information from throughout the day, and the lack of sleep can negatively impact both short and long-term memory. Let's talk about mood changes. Sleep deprivation can make you moody, it can make you emotional, it can make you quick-tempered. It can also lead to anxiety and depression. We've established weakened immunity can be a result of stress, and it can also be as a result of lack of sleep, putting you more at risk for colds, the flu, and other sicknesses, meaning you're probably going to have to miss work or miss certain functions. If we're not getting enough sleep, our risk for diabetes is up because lack of sleep affects the body's release of insulin. How about this one? Low sex drive. We'll try poor balance. Risk of heart disease. Lack of sleep, it leads to increased blood pressure and higher levels of chemicals linked to inflammation. We can also add into that weight gain, because that chemical in your brain that tells you you're full, it's off balance with that lack of sleep, so you become more likely then to overeat. We're also talking high blood pressure, more likely to have auto accidents, and not to be overlooked, trouble thinking and concentrating, of course. So pretty much what we're saying here is that nothing good is going to come from not getting enough sleep. So what then are some ways we can continue to practice that self-care and get that good night's rest? Well, I got a few tips that you can follow along with here on the screen. So maybe putting dark shades over the windows, or wear a mask to block light. If you're like me and you have trouble sort of turning your thoughts off at night and are distracted by any noise in the sound, use a fan or a white noise machine to keep background noise down. Also, though, do not turn on the television. That's one I struggle with myself. Keep your room between 60 and 70 degrees. Don't use tobacco before you go to bed, because nicotine, it's another stimulant that can make you sleep less soundly. Also, if you can quit smoking, highly recommend it. It's going to be better for a lot of things, including sleep, because a lot of smokers, they actually wake up too early because their bodies, they start to crave that cigarette overnight or first thing in the morning, and so they're interrupting their sleep to get that smoke. You'll want to avoid caffeinated beverages late in the day, because it takes at least 8 hours to get caffeine out of your system. Also, try and stay away from alcohol later in the day. Alcohol is a diuretic. It causes dehydration. Also results in poor quality of sleep. You'll want to get regular exercise, as we talked about. Try to work out, though, at least 5 hours before bed. I almost always fail at that one, since I usually don't get home until about 7 or later. And I'm not a morning person, so morning workouts are out for me. Avoid naps late in the day. Have a bedtime routine. Maybe this means taking a warm bath, listening to soft music, reading a book. But you'll want to shut off those electronics. So this means cell phones, tablets, computers, because the thing is that blue light that comes from those electronics, it's actually going to fool your brain into thinking that it's daytime. So try to be off your electronics at least an hour before bed. And lastly, studies show we probably shouldn't be using the bed for anything except sleep or sex, or sometimes making a little pillow fort, I guess. So as I come to a close and we get to questions, look, while I can't guarantee that any of what I've just rattled off is going to be easy to do, look, change is hard. And there's no guarantee that that change that you make today is going to benefit you tomorrow. But what I can pretty well guarantee you is that if you take a consistent stab at trying to implement some of these changes, the dividends might pay off by a noticeable increase in your ability to cope with stress. You might notice that you're less anxious. You might start to experience more happy days instead of sad ones. You might start to notice that you're getting sick less often, that your body starts to just feel better, that you notice better brain functioning, including improved memory, cognition, longer attention span, better judgment, enhanced problem solving, and even safer driving.